Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Traction session, Traction panel. We've got an awesome lineup here for you today. We're doing this panel a little bit differently. We're kind of splitting it into two. This first portion, we're going to be focused on traction for premium games primarily and working with publishers. And then we're going to kick them out of the room. And then we're going to bring in a bunch of folks more on the venture and game as a service side to talk about traction more on that side of the business. It's actually kind of interesting because depending what business model you're in and depending what kind of financing you're going for, traction kind of has a different meaning. So we thought we would be more complicated than we need to be and actually have two panels within one. I think it'll make for a really interesting conversation, and for the folks that stick with us for the combination of both panels, it'll be really interesting to kind of see the contrast and the different challenges that come from those two different models. So for the first 40 minutes or so, we have these lovely panelists: Thierry from Sabotage, Philomena from Stray Fawn, and then Cassia Curran, who. You just call yourself? It's just Cassia, or it's just the Cassia agency, I guess.
Curran Games Agency. Thank you very much.
Curran Games Agency. Yeah. I just go with Jason, so that's I don't have a fancy agency name. All right, so just to kind of kick us off, let's do a quick round of introductions. Philomena, I'll start with you. Just a quick intro.
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Philomena. I am from Zurich, tuning in, and I have an indie game studio there. We started out 5 years ago, made 2 profitable games so far, and the third one is on the way.
Awesome. And lots of traction, which we're going to get into. Thierry, our local boy, quick intro, please.
Yes, my name is Thierry. I'm a co-founder and creative director at Sabotage Studio in Quebec City. We make retro-inspired game with modernized design. So our first game, The Messenger, worked out pretty good. And our second game now, Sea of Stars, we're working on a turn-based RPG. And I suppose it's got some traction too if I'm here today.
Yeah, well, indeed it does. All right, and then Cassia from the Curran Agency. A quick, doesn't that sound good?
Yes, it does sound fantastic. Thank you very much.
A quick intro.
Yes, so as Jason says, I'm Cassia from the Curran Games Agency, and through my agency, I assist lots of indie game studios, and a large part of what I do with this assisting is helping indie game studios find source publishers, reach out to them, pitch them, and negotiate contracts and publishing deals. So I know quite a lot about traction and the good it can do for your finding the right publisher.
Well, and Cassie, I mean, also you are part of Wing, so on the funding side, you've been part of large publishers doing, deals.
Absolutely, yeah. I have a lot of background on the publishing and investment side, so I'm also advising various funds, including Wings. I also, like my background has been corporate development, business development for big companies such as Jagex and NetEase. I really looking around, finding these games and working out whether to publish them or invest in them.
Yeah. Right. Awesome. Well, so one of the reasons why I wanted to do this panel, I mean, I do some similar work to Cassia in that I do advise studios, help them get funding, work with them on their pitch. And it's interesting because so many developers come very late. They've done a bunch of work. They've really focused on production and making production progress. And like, oh, we've got this thing that we put all this code and animation design, art, whatever into, let's go off and get a deal now. And what ends up happening is you kind of hit a wall because there's no traction, right? And it's so often my lesson or my sort of advice is, okay, hold on, you're not ready yet. We got to go back and get some traction. Cassia, I mean, I'm going to maybe point to you first, as sort of the investor-y person here of the group. I mean, how do you define traction? Like when someone says, "Oh, you need more traction," like what are you actually saying?
Well, it really just means evidence that the game has an audience that can be successful. You think about it from a publisher's perspective. A publisher like Team 17, for example, will typically have something like 2,500 pitches from game studios per year. That's a lot to get through. And if you're faced with two different games, both of which you have really fun prototypes that you can play, but one of the games, they've got like a really thriving community already around the game, for example, and the other one is just like completely silent. You don't know whether it has whether there's any market for it whatsoever. You're going to be much more interested in the first game, first studio, than in the latter. And that's really what it kind of boils down to.
So it's evidence that success is possible.
Yes.
Yeah. Philomena, is this sort of like, is that a wall that you've hit in the past where you've tried to do a deal or talk to someone and they say, oh, you need more traction?
We're maybe not the best example for people that are looking for publishers, because if we ever work with publishers, it's usually like Asian publishers, like for that specific thing, but definitely like with platforms. So we have been ignored lots of times, right? So with the two previous games, when I tried to get console exclusivity deals, I didn't get a reply. And then like slowly I started getting replies that said no, and I was good, that's a step forward. At least they pay attention to me now. And now with the Wandering Village, we had something to show with our newest game project, and we actually managed to get a deal this time. So traction definitely helped. I think I can also say that our studio tries to work a little bit with this approach, that we don't go right into production and just work on something, but we like make a first idea pitch prototype that we invest maybe a couple months of, then we post it on social media and see if there's like, if we can gather attention for the pitch. And then it goes to Kickstarter. So that's like another step where we test if we can actually market the game. It goes to early access, where it's like a minimal viable product. And then from there on, the game has to finance itself. And we call this like our stepped development method, because if we would just work on something for 3 years and then it would come out and flop, then that would be the end of our studio. So we constantly need to test and see if we can find the traction or not. If not, then we have to move on to something else.
Interesting. Well, and again, I like this word evidence. I've never sort of used I've used like data, de-risk, validation, but evidence is so. For the minute, it's almost like what you're saying is, even you as the developer, you're looking for evidence at every step that you take. Like never mind even bothering to pitching, but you yourself are looking for that evidence.
Yeah, correct. And then when we find it, then the publishers come to us usually, because they have good systems in place, right, where they can track where if you're getting some attention.
Yeah. Thierry, what do you think about this idea of evidence? And I think I'd be curious to hear your reflection on the difference between the first game and the second game.
Well, it's for us the big difference is we had no authority, if that's the word for it. Like with the first game, we just came out of nowhere, right? And it's like, hey, here's a retro platformer. Well, it's something you heard 8,000 times, right? Probably last week. So it's like, okay, can we make this good enough that it still stands out, right? And then we try to build a name to ourselves. So the RPG was going to be the first project, or at least the one that as a team we're the most excited about. But we understood that it's too complex. You can't ask people who don't know you to kind of trust you with complex systems and like all the care that goes in that kind of execution and production. So we did the kind of like we called it the I jump, therefore I am. It's very simple. And then how much quality can we show through that simple proposition? So everything, gameplay, music, visuals, was something that you just get in 3 seconds when you look at it. And so from there, the game did very good. We had good reviews. We won a game award. And so through all of that, and also we got published by Devolver, which gave us a lot of credibility too. And so from there, for the second game, the first thing, well, a lot of basically everything Philomena said is also how we approach things. We're very similar in our vision there. But so for the Kickstarter wasn't Well, because we know this being in the business, right, is that you can't ask for even 5% of what it actually costs to make a game. People don't get it. They think that $10,000 is supposed to give you like this big AAA thing because $10,000 is a lot on a personal level, and it's like that's nothing, you know. And so that's why we went with a very low number, because what we really wanted to see was if we commit all of our savings into this production, if we go all in, will people buy it in the end, or do we have to close the studio? So that's the main thing we were looking for, was that validation, to have that confidence going into production. If we take it home and we do it right, and what we showed is all true, so it's just more of what we promised, you know, and not, oh, that was just hand-drawn animated, now we have to actually make the game, it feels differently. We showed something that feels exactly like what we're making. And so we wanted to prove that. And then again, you have the social proof, right? And like Philomena said, then the publishers come to you. And it's such a different situation that you're in, because you don't have to coax anyone into like, no, but hear me out, even though at first it sounds like a thing you've heard before or whatever. They come to you, they already know about it, they know your role in the studio, and they come to you making a case for them to be the publisher.
Nice.
So it's a very different relationship. And then you've got all these options, and you can be much more difficult, and you just go with your ask because you know that there will be something else. You know, so yeah, I mean, Traction is, without that, would be nowhere with it. We'd be trying to pitch a thing that everyone's heard thousands of times before, and would be hard to get a reply, you know?
Yeah.
I think that sorry to just jump in, but
Go.
I think that a mistake I sort of see indie game studios make is that they get really caught up in copying massive studios' habit of secrecy. And there's a reason for why you want to, if you've got huge access to capital and massive marketing budget and a marketing team, there's reasons why you want to keep a project secret, and time like your PR and your paid advertising campaigns, and have those kind of special marketing beats. It makes for a more effective marketing campaign. But for indies, frankly, you won't have access to that kind of marketing capital. It's really what your strength is that you've got the creativity. You're competing on creativity and something that really touches a nerve with the audience. You're the one who kind of has to find that audience, to be honest. So yeah, it's a mistake to be just like silent about your game. You want to, like, from the very earliest time, be shouting about it and seeing if you can sort of find that route to the audience.
Well, Cass, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I see two roadblocks there, and I don't. I mean, maybe we have exceptional developers here on the panel with us, but the two roadblocks I often see, one is a lack of confidence. Right, so like, oh, I'm working on this thing. I don't feel ready yet to show my baby to the world. I don't want to be told it's crap. I can't, you know, emotionally I can't handle that. So there's kind of this confidence issue of showing, not showing. And then there's just the more pragmatic issue that an indie, it's a coder, an artist, a design, like there's no marketing person, there's no community manager yet. And any time that the coder, you know, has to be doing social media posts and sending it is like time that's not coding or animating. So I think there's an allocation of resource that indies don't respect the need to do the marketing.
But I would argue that the most important marketing decision is your game design. And if your game design sort of inherently has that kind of interest, that hook, that's something you can test out really quite early. I don't know what to tell you about. I think the developers here are probably going to be much better than me at saying, you know, when's the good point to show, and like, you know, how to get over or how do you deal with those feelings of lacking confidence, or, you know, showing something very like nascent to the world.
Philomena, can you comment on that? I mean, obviously you deeply believe in the value of this, but how do you overcome that confidence issue? Is it too soon, too late?
I think it's always too soon. So if you feel like you're ready to show it, then it's too late. Yeah, I see this also a lot in Switzerland. We have a lot of people that are like being shy, and they first polish everything like so much into detail that it's like, and at the point they show it, it's like almost done. So there's like no more room for feedback and to really find the unique selling points in there anymore, because it's, yeah. And so usually what helps me a little bit is that when I first show a screenshot or a video or whatever, then I'm just like, hey, we're trying out this thing. We have this new idea. Do you think it's cool? And not like, this is my game that I worked on for a year or something. Just like very casual. Look at this. What do you like better, this or this? So with our current project, with the Wandering Village, we already started doing that before we even really had like screenshots. We like told people the pitch and started to look for a name, just like based on one image that we drew. And that there we already saw, okay, so the pitch by itself is already powerful, even like without the visuals. And they're like, okay, let's wait if we have a pretty visual. And then when we combined it, we saw that it's got to work.
Yeah, nice. And I like the comment of, if you're comfortable, it's too late. Like,
Yeah.
then you're actually in trouble. Thierry, I mean, you sort of talked about this idea for the current game that like the Kickstarter was really the kind of the validation you needed to like, are we going to do this? Does this give us the confidence to proceed? I mean, is that the benchmark? Is it just yes, no, we did it, or we like the Kickstarter succeeded or didn't, or was it more nuanced? You're looking at sort of different benchmarks or different numbers.
Unless the Kickstarter had like we had a metric where if it fails on that level, we need to cancel the project because it means we're just up in our heads with this and no one believes. And if no one is there to play it, I mean, there's some creative expression to the craft, but you also want it to be sustainable because, we have a studio of 23 people, some have kids and all that. So you have this responsibility, right, of putting out a thing that's relevant to some market. But yeah, no, so the main thing for us is that, especially because it's something that's been promised so many times, the kind of spiritual successor to something that it looks like we're seen as now. That's what we were shooting for, but we didn't want to seed or to plan this ourselves. We wanted to see will people say it, and that's one thing. Like a mistake we see often is well, or that we would consider a mistake. Sorry, I'm not saying it objectively is, but it's naming other games to be like, hey, my game is like that. Well, it's Pokemon and Zelda. It's like, yeah, I mean, anyone can say this, and you just want me to infer that you've got all that polish, all that quality, all those high moments will be in your game just because you mentioned those two games. What if you don't say it, you pitch me your game, and then the gut reaction from the internet is like, oh, that's kind of like Pokemon and Zelda. Now you're like, oh, okay, right. People get it. People connect to what we were trying to say. And I think back to what Philomena was saying earlier, so she has this thing of like, oh, there's a giant, I'm sorry if this is the wrong pitch, but like there's the giant dinosaur with a village on it and it's walking around and you get to build on its back or whatever. That's kind of my takeaway. Okay. So that's beautiful, right? But you can't, you just say this and everyone will go like, that's awesome. Can I see it? Can I see the dinosaur? Can I touch the village? Can I plant things? Do people eat? I can't wait to see this. Will the background change? Do we get somewhere else eventually? So now I have many questions. I want to be excited about your thing. And so if you gold plate, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, yeah. That's actually like, that's amazing. And like everybody's excited, but it's also like, oh my God, now we have so much expectation.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But it's just back to your point of like, if you're gold plating, if you start like, oh, we want this vertical slice to be like at final quality and like, the sound design and like everything is so intricate, you start pitching it and then you get worried, like, are they noticing all the little details here? And then you can end up giving the kind of pitch where you're so in your head that you want to name every single detail that only you fully get, or that a player would after playing for like 20 hours. Your game, that's not a pitch. Whereas if you go with a simple idea, and you test that simple idea, and then you tell, do people react? Do people want to hear more or not? That's what you can actually pitch, and it's the same mistake that we can do in production, so, say with level design, no, this has to be fun with gray blocks, If we make this beautiful now, we'll delude ourselves in thinking it's great just because it's beautiful, and maybe we forgot to make sure it was fun. So always go and milk everything that you can, without those layers that you can add later and will be great, which are more objective, or just the process of polishing and everything.
Yeah. Well, again, looking for that evidence, in that case, evidence of fun.
Yeah.
Cassia, I'm curious if you have thoughts on, kind of benchmarks and targets and, I think potentially some folks listening here are like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I have to post a screenshot to Twitter and get 1,000 likes and that counts? If I don't get 1,000 likes, then it's no good. Like, is there some tangible metrics to sort of shoot for?
Sort of, yes, but they keep changing, so it's a little bit difficult to be like, oh, you should definitely find this now. But actually, it's you should be taking as your benchmarks probably other games that are relatively similar in terms of scope and like target audience. Like if you're finding, that the sort of action game that you're making, for example, like a small indie action game, different indie action game had like many thousands of retweets on theirs, or like a massive Reddit post of thousands. Like, what was that number? And you can almost extrapolate out from there, like roughly like how successful your pitch is compared to theirs. And I think thinking about where does your audience live is kind of important. So I think like Twitter's audience is different from Reddit, which is different from TikTok, for example. You can even like arguably, there are some publishers who do this. Like you put up like a Steam page with like a trailer for your game, which could be quite early on actually. And if they just without doing any marketing, you're getting over 100 organic wish lists per day, then your game is definitely going to be a hit. If it's getting less than 10 organic wish lists a day, then you should have a think about actually whether you want to keep investing in this game. But I would be looking at how other games did that have released and been successful, and what their how did their sort of outreaches in the early stages of the game go?
Yeah, interesting. It sort of makes me think of the old school like fake landing page funnel test type of.
Yeah, I mean, you can also do CTR tests. There's nothing. I mean, so mobile game studios, they get to do CPI tests, but you can also. There's nothing to stop you from making a fake ad for your game and putting it on Facebook, like making different versions. If you have a benchmark, like a similar game that the sales for, like that you made, so don't steal anyone else's fun. But you can actually probably extrapolate from that, like you see whether your ad for your new game, your fake ad for your new game, is as more successful or less successful than a fake ad for your previous game. Then you kind of get to know, maybe it'll be a data point.
It's interesting. I mean, literally, I was having a conversation yesterday with a developer who had a particular genre in mind and a particular audience, and they had this whole vision that particular audience wasn't well served anymore, and that their game for sure was going to succeed because a bit like what Thierry said, it's going to be that magical Pokemon meets Zelda, and everyone wants that and no one has it, and I said, like, okay, I go along for the ride, but like what's the evidence? How do you know that that's true? And my recommendation was do a fake, like a fake ad, like put up an ad, show it to, pick your right audience on Facebook, use segmentation tools, and do people click on the promise of, this meets this, and are they clicking and so on? Philomena, have you ever done any of those kind of fake landing page, tests and stuff? Or?
No, I think on Steam you're not even allowed to put up fake Steam pages if you are not planning on making the game. As far as I'm aware, there are some publishers that do it though.
Yes, that's right.
So yes, that's a bit in a gray area, but we sometimes do like tests for our capsule art, like on Steam, where we put up different versions and then we check which one works best. And sometimes it's definitely not the one we expected. So that seems to work quite well. I'm really hoping Steam will at some point please finally introduce A/B testing. It would help us all so much if they did. Like, for capsules, for texts, and so on. Then you could like track directly with the Steam audience what they are more interested in. One thing I would recommend before giving up on your 10 wish lists a day game is giving it at least like 5 spins of changing your tags around. After a week or after 2, if it's not going well, just change your tags. like for our game, sometimes like we don't get a lot of traction anymore, and then we change the text, and then it's working again. So Steam algorithm works in mysterious ways. Yeah, I think that's what we usually try in these terms with Facebook.
Cool. And then I mean, going back again to this idea of like kind of benchmarks and metrics and stuff. I mean, Philomena, before you described a little bit your kind of steps, you know, validation process.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of what does that benchmark look to give you the confidence to then go to the next step?
Yeah, hard.
What are you counting? What are you tracking?
So before the Kickstarter, I mean, the Kickstarter is usually a good benchmark, right? But before you do that, it's just like, I know how many likes I usually get on Twitter and on Facebook when I post for our other games. This is based on my experience now, right? On the 2 previous games, or how many new people are joining the Discord when we make like a development video or so on. And then if I feel it's the same or more, then I'm confident. This time we had like the biggest tweet that we did with the Wandering Village was during a hashtag, what was it again? The big indie awards, pitch a game.
Oh, yeah.
Where we had one tweet that had like 7,000 likes, and it was just an image of a very early in-game thingy. And I was like, okay, that's like beyond whatever. Yeah, beyond everything before.
Nice. Nice. Thierry, I mean, what are you doing now? I mean, obviously the Kickstarter was a very important milestone. I mean, as Philomena just said as well, so that important benchmark of validation, of traction. I mean, what are you doing now post Kickstarter to kind of keep that momentum, or have you kind of, you know, locked the door and heads down production? How do you balance that?
We still do a lot, and that's one, I think one of the overarching things that of what we're talking about today is that some studios understand the importance of marketing and have people doing that full time, right? So we have 2 people at the studio who do nothing but that, you know, and so content to make sure that there's weekly posts, you know. So we do Twitter, Instagram, mostly, and Facebook, and we're looking at TikTok actually right now. We're not clear on the conversion, if something is
TikTok
viral there,
is,
how much,
yes, TikTok
how many
has
sales
good
that lead to,
conversion.
but oh yeah, great. So yeah, so we're we might want to hit you up on that later, I guess then. But yeah, so we're actually looking at that right now. And then our Discord, we're growing a Discord, so we ran an ARG on Discord, the alternate reality game, where we kind of like animate the crowd and have events and introduce characters. We have a compendium on our website where we reveal new characters with their bios, you know, and screenshots and sprites as we get more followers. And so people can kind of like pull content out of us, right? If they engage. And so yeah, and then we're just testing different formulas, because we're not like in full gear, like we're you know 4 to 6 months before the game comes out, and now it's time for the big banger. So now we're doing like a lot of like some kind of A/B testing, you know. And so, for example, one thing we understood last week is if we remove the end slate, we used to have an end slate on any like weekly videos that we did to go like, oh, you can wish list now on Steam or whatever. That's when people stop watching, so it messes with the watch through algorithm. You know, and now we just remove the end slate, and everything now is doing like 2,000 instead of like 500 on average, just because of that, you know. And so we're kind of mapping all these yeah, that's a little nugget, but you know, we're just mapping all of these things of like what really works, you know, because for us, that's the thing we like about our game. But when we show it, it doesn't really come through easily with a GIF or whatever. So, but this other thing we take for granted, people go crazy. Like for some reason, whenever we show the world map, it always goes like, you know. And so we're like, all right, I mean, it's just a world map, but I guess that's the thing people seem to like the most on this platform. And so now we're kind of like taking notes, right? Trying everything. And then we'll be able to know what really works. And when it's time for the big guns, you know, we'll be like, all right, now we're using the world map packaged precisely in this way because we need this one to be the big one because the game comes out soon or whatever. So now it's like this exploration, you know, and trial and error. So it's a very fun process, but you do need people who care about that and who genuinely want to like discuss it and like look at the numbers and try to figure it out. And it's true for territories as well. For some reason, Latin America can't get over our game. They can't get enough. Like most of the engagement that we see is from Latin America, but that's very good data, you know. It's not for a reason that we understand or that we planned, right? But we're certainly embracing it, you know. When it comes time to do ads or to prioritize some things, like Portuguese is in our localization, but we'll make extra sure it's a good one. We know we can ask the community to vet our partner, like, is this good? Is this what you want? Can you help? And so yeah, it's just a bunch of things like that, you know.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I mean, Thierry, wonderful that you have two people kind of full time.
Mhm.
You know, for the benefit of the audience, I'm guessing that those two people were kind of there from the start
Mm.
of the
Oh yeah,
project. Is that true?
for sure. Yeah. Well, so one is Phil, right? My co-owner at Sabotage, and so he has a marketing background, and like that's really his thing. And so the Kickstarter campaign was, okay, we think the game is great. I feel I can give a good pitch on camera. But then he was there to, like, in the shadows, you know, doing all the strategy and all the ads and things like that. And we got to a point, you know, like through BackerKit, once it starts picking up, because this ad thing I personally don't really get, but it came to a point where if we spend $1, we know we make 5, right? But that doesn't mean if you spend 5 million, you make 25 million. Like, there's an addressable market. At some point it caps. And so just to have someone who's comfortable playing with those numbers and trying to find the hard limit, you know, and to maximize everything, that's what you need. And then as soon as the campaign ended, that's when we hired someone else, or a bit later we hired someone else to join Phil, and then he's more on the content side. So he'll do the cuts, he'll go in game, he'll propose, like, for the weekly post, we could do this or that. What do you think? And the two of them together, they kind of have like the big overarching strategy, but also the week per week.
Nice.
Make sure there's always something, you know, because with production, we'd always make that the last priority, you know.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Well, Cassia, I mean, you know, you work with a bunch of studios.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if that's a kind of common gap that you see, where it's like they have no one allocated, that you know, the team hasn't hired someone to do those things like Thierry's talking about, and they're kind of viewing, oh, we'll do that marketing stuff, we'll do that community stuff, we'll build our track like later. We'll worry about that after. Is that something you see?
It sometimes I see that, and sometimes the teams are so small and so lean that they it's going to be someone's jobs that's part-time, and they have to like integrate it into their sort of daily, weekly work. Is like, so, and that means they just have to really focus, and often it varies upon different approaches. I think that I quite frequently thank goodness that I'm not actually an indie game developer, because it's so incredibly difficult. But there's so much that goes into it, and it's like, where do you allocate your time, and finite resources? It's very challenging. But honestly, experimenting, seeing if you can get traction early in the market actually can save you a bunch of time. And it helps you to allocate those resources smartly. So yeah, I mean, give an example of one of my studios. They have been very much experimenting with different platforms, and like Twitter, they got like, you know, like a little bit of traction, but TikTok was very much like 2 weeks of posting, and they found they got 3,000 followers, and one of the videos got 40,000 views already, and it's just like a new studio with like yeah, a little bit of like 6 videos or something like that. So very good. Yeah.
We started TikTok like 3 months ago, and it already has more followers than our Twitter that we had for 5 years. So
amazing.
TikTok is great, and I've heard a lot of developers like showing their wish list and their sales spikes, and a lot of them were able to track it down to TikTok. So I'm confident it will convert.
Although eventually that will get saturated, I think, as well.
Yeah, right. It's like always when there's a new thing, they're very generous with their traffic, right? You can go there, get a lot of traffic, and on Facebook you now have to pay to even reach everybody that liked your page. So yeah, it's a matter of maturing, right? So indie devs always have to jump on the newest hype train and get the traffic while it's there.
Well, yeah, if you do get traction, if you do get traffic, you really need to see if you can capture that back into your studio, and not just, you know, have it live on your TikTok or live in a Discord. See if you bring them into a mailing list that you own, or something along those lines, because otherwise you're at the mercy of the platforms that you've gotten traction on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Chris Zukowski did an article about that, like how to kind of bring them back to your, I forget the name of the article, but Philomena, maybe quick, can you comment on this kind of resource allocation issue? I mean, I think a lot of the indies out there, they're still sort of struggling with, you know, I'm busy coding and animating. Where do I find that time? And it feels to me like ever since we first met, ever, like from the beginning, you always had this mindset. So how did you juggle in the early days when really you know were much smaller?
I'm still juggling a lot. So
Juggling more in the early days.
yeah. So like for this project, I have to do the project management and like the overall project lead. I have to do half of the game design, and I have to do like the marketing. So it's very busy. We now hired a second marketing person like 3 months ago, and she is responsible for TikTok. So all the TikTok information, Thierry, I have to send you to her because she understands it better than me now. And yeah, it's kind of at the beginning, after the Kickstarter, I should have done more game design, but I was like totally in the marketing mood. So I spent a lot of time like looking for events that we can participate in. And then the whole team had to make like trailers so we could participate in the event. So I distracted basically my whole team for like 3 or 4 months from actually making the game. It was worth it in terms of exposure and wish list, but we now had to like move the release to next year. So it's like,
yeah, but
I think it was
you're building
worth it,
evidence, right? You're building that traction, you're building that momentum, and then as you said before, the conversations that you then have with the platforms and about deals, and that all becomes easier.
Yeah, thanks to that, we were able to get a platform deal, so we could it wasn't a problem to have the release a bit later, and I think in the end it's going to pay out. But yeah, there you see it again. We would maybe also need, in the long run, I would love to have somebody who just makes like videos and trailers and all that kind of content that we can just post. Currently, it's still like everybody needs to switch heads.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's great that you can go in and like distract your team for a couple of months.
They don't always like it.
But it's like more developers should have that mindset. Cassia, can you kind of comment sort of, you know, as you know, someone on the that has been on the investment side, deal making side, give us a sense of impact of traction. Like you kind of said it before, you get 1,000 pitches, but just give us a sense of really how much easier it is for the deal making to happen.
It makes it so much easier, because if you don't have evidence, then all you're kind of going on is the team's subjective opinions, and it kind of just takes one person to just not really like the prototype, for example, not really like feel the pitch sometimes, or like a key person. That just means that it just dies internally, because you've got so many other options as well. There's so many indie game developers, so many studios, and so many game pitches, that a game pitch which demonstrates there's a market and a community, it becomes much more of a no-brainer compared to the other ones. So.
Do you find in sort of your, you know, the deal making days that studios over relied on the team and the prototype as like validation, like say, oh, well, our team is so good, so experienced, we've been veterans, so that's our traction, or the prototype is so fun that like it's development traction? Like, if you kind of see what I'm saying.
I mean, if your team's got amazing background, sometimes that can actually push something forward. Sometimes the prototype is absolutely just mind-bogglingly amazing. That can push a deal forward. But if you've got really amazing traction, that also can push a deal forward. Like having all three is like brilliant. But if you're lacking the kind of track record, if the prototype is not
early,
particularly polished, still early, but like there's obviously like a bit of a community. There's like your pitch, your idea has already got some interest from players, then that's very useful.
Nice, cool. All right, so we're almost out of time. Maybe we can go around and just super quick, a little example or a tip of like something that really kind of netted some good traction, some good evidence, you know, good you know, likes or followers or new subs or something. Thierry, anything that really, something that really made a difference?
You mean about traction in general, or?
Yeah. You did something, you know, I don't know, a Reddit post, and that got upvoted, and now you've got.
for real, like for us, it's not about a one-off viral thing, because we're mindful that might be like a shallow increase in followers. And so we're really about that steady growth, that flywheel effort of like, it's just percentage based. We do 1%, 2%, 3% a week. And we know everyone is there for real, because we don't find a clever way to make people like a thing they don't actually like. We just show it honestly. And then 2% is always from a bigger base the next week. And we just track that and make sure we maintain that. And if we don't, we try to ask our questions why. And so, yeah, and that's my thing. The thing that changed everything is taking marketing seriously. And when I talk to other indies, I often hear like either it's not important or there's a lot of fake experts or whatever. Yeah, well, try a real expert and see what happens. It's most likely the solution to your problem if you can't do more with the quality of your game and it's just not working out.
Awesome. All right. I think the admin people are going to interrupt us in just a moment. So okay. So so what's going to happen now? We're going to say thank you and goodbye to Philomena and Cassia and Thierry. We're going to drop off, and then in I think 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes, we're going to be back with a new set of investors and developers, and we're talking about more the venture game as a service side of Traction, which is actually going to be a very different conversation. So go grab a coffee. We'll be back in a few minutes, and super thanks the three of you for sharing on this first half. We'll see the audience back again in about less than 10 minutes, hopefully. All right. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That was nice.
All right, folks. We're back. I think we're back faster than we anticipated. Thank you for playing along with us. In the first half of this session, we heard from more the premium, Steam console side of things. Very interesting conversation. And now we're completely switching gears, and we're going now more the game as a service and venture investable side of things. And as you will see soon enough, the conversation is actually quite different. I think philosophically, the idea of traction and validation remains true, but how you go about that is quite different. And so we've got a different set of panelists here. We've got Sophia joining us from Makers Fund, Chris from Griffin Gaming Partners, and Ian Proulx with a very French last name, but not French, from 1044 Studios, famously the makers of Splitgate. And what we'll do before we dive in, we'll just kind of give a chance for everyone to do a brief introduction. Sophia, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So Makers is a global gaming dedicated VC fund. We invest across the ecosystem in content, B2C platforms, tech, and more. We do early stage, specifically Series A, though we do some seed and B when the opportunity is right. And I think we've been around since 5 years ago. We have over 80 portfolio companies to date across 3 funds. So that includes Dream Games, GenVid, VRChat, Parsec. And as for myself, I'm an investor on our North America team. I sit in New York. I joined 2 years ago. I was previously at McKinsey's San Francisco office, where I worked on consumer tech projects, strategy, go-to-market. And I leapt at the opportunity to have gaming as a full-time job. I've been here ever since. So I work closely with our portfolio founders, and we're always looking for exciting, inspiring teams.
Awesome. All right. Well, and I have a bunch of questions for you around early stage versus Series A and the traction difference there. But Chris, a quick intro, please.
Sure. Yeah, I am an investor at Griffin Gaming Partners. We are a VC firm also focused on investing in the gaming industry globally, also investing at the early and late stages. Before joining the VC world, I spent some time investing in the public markets, primarily in the tech sector, including some gaming investments such as Activision, Blizzard, and Glue Mobile. As far as Griffin's portfolio, some of the companies we've invested in are Discord, Skills, and Forte.
Cool. Did either of you not invest in Ian's company?
We did not have, the amazing foresight that others did, and now it's a huge detriment.
We're going to talk about that too. Griffin's not in on 1044?
We are not.
1047.
1047.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. God damn. I'm sorry, Ian.
It's all good.
And also, as evidenced by Chris's mantle, he is a former pro Halo player, and he's also into NFT. So he's got a little NFT object there in the background. So awesome. Ian, 1047, quick intro, please.
Hey guys, I'm Ian Proulx. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 1047 Games. Our claim to fame, as you guys just mentioned earlier, is Splitgate. We just launched our beta this past July. I'm also kind of the original visionary behind the idea of putting portals into an FPS. A lot of people say Splitgate is kind of like Halo mixed with Portal, as I think Chris would agree with. But yeah, definitely, started off as just literally an idea in my dorm room of, hey, I wonder what this would be like if you put Portal into an FPS, and then has naturally kind of evolved over time. And yeah, happy to dive into that over this call.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. And I didn't do it on purpose to pick investors that hadn't invested in you. It just sort of worked out that way. So, but that'll create an interesting point of the conversation. Sophia, I'm going to start with you. I mean, this panel is sort of about traction. Investors always throw that word around and say, "Oh, you need more traction," or "Come back to us when you have more traction." What does traction actually mean? And when you say that to someone, "Come back when you have more traction," what are you actually saying? What do you mean?
Yes. So I would say, when your investor comes back to saying, "Oh, we would, it's a very interesting idea, but we'd love to see more traction." Usually this is in the form of, I would say, a team comes to us, they have like a pitch that outlines what the idea is, like they've already started doing the recruiting, but they might not have a playable that we can test out, or there just aren't the metrics that we as an investor expect to see. So for that, usually it means like, maybe once you have your, like, I don't know, your early release out, you've started collecting like kind of the standards. There is some difference with mobile versus, PC, but there are expectations in terms of your DAU, your MAU, your retention, for mobile, your payback period, et cetera. And I think oftentimes teams don't know what those kind of core benchmarks are. So I think if you look at like an App Annie or a Sensor Tower for your genre, it's a little easier for you to understand, okay, these are kind of the expectations for when I'm talking to a VC. This is like just the common language.
Okay. All right. We'll get back to this notion of benchmarks. Chris, I mean, does that sort of sound pretty much exactly how Griffin sort of views traction as well, or do you have a different sort of nuance to it?
No, I would say so. I mean, I guess the only sort of like nuance I would add, if anything, is just somewhat it depends, right? So depending on the genre, depending on a number of different factors, how much traction is appropriate may vary a little bit. But generally, I agree, right? Like it could be a certain amount of revenue, it could be certain retention or spend metrics, with a cohort of users of a certain size. But that's generally how we think about it as well.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to come back to that. Ian, I'm curious. I mean, you've had a gangbuster year this year. You've been at it for many years. How many times did you hear that? Hey, Ian, cool idea. Come back when you've got, like, how often did you do that?
A lot. I mean, I spent basically a year and a half fundraising, like literally talked to everybody multiple times. Nobody would invest. And I think, a big part of that was, people would look at it and they say, okay, it looks like a really good game, but your game, we did a soft launch actually in May of 2019, and the numbers did this, basically immediately day one, we're like 12,000 concurrent, and then it was just down. I think what a lot of like our case to the VCs was like, look, this was all by design. I mean, to a certain degree. Our thought process from the get-go was we need to just do a soft launch. We know it's not feature complete. We know that there's still going to be a lot of learnings, but our thought process was we're going to learn a lot more efficiently if we actually have a product out there. And even though it's bare bones, rough gameplay, just kind of a concept, if we're just kind of working on it, most games, right? It's very hit driven. It's very much spend years and years developing the product, and then put all your marketing into the first few weeks. Our thought process was we're going to do the opposite, which is we're going to put it out as soon as we possibly can, and we're not going to spend a lot on marketing. And then as we iterate, then once we get the metrics good, then we'll start spending money. The issue we were running into was because we had such a small player base, it didn't matter that we were making all this improvement. We got our day 1 and day 7 up a lot, but we couldn't get day 30 up because with a small player base, you have horrible matchmaking. And so we kind of had to make a big bet at some point because, if we just kept iterating slowly but surely, it doesn't matter. If you have to wait 5 minutes to go get a really lopsided match, nobody's going to have fun. So that was why we couldn't get any traction. We could show progress to the metrics on like certain things. We could say, hey, look, the reviews have gotten a lot better. The game is just polished. It's fun. But people wouldn't invest because it's like, well, you don't have any traction, right? Like your game's been at 300 concurrent players for 2 years.
Yeah. So I'm going to put Chris and Sophia on the spot. Were either of you in some of those early conversations with Ian where you had to say a no?
So I guess I have like an easy out on this. I was not the point person for Ian, but I did. The whole team has play tested the game, and like obviously we all checked it out when they had the huge CCU spike this summer, and I actually loved it. I mean, I did not play a ton of Halo growing up, but I loved Portal, and it's very interesting, and it leads to kind of different strategizing in terms of playing. So I think early on when we were placing, there were some issues, as Ian alluded to, on the matchmaking side. Like I tried to test it out with the team, but when we played it this summer, it was a huge splash.
Chris, were you part of those early no's?
So I have known Ian for quite a bit. I'm a big Halo fan, as you mentioned. I always thought the concept of Splitgate was great. I still play Splitgate every now and then as well. But yeah, I've had a few discussions with Ian.
Cool.
I think Chris was one of the believers, though.
He's being very diplomatic.
I have the my compliance rules in front of me. So
I said I'm putting you on the spot, so I thanks for playing along. But
sure.
Ian, I mean, just for the benefit of the audience, Splitgate, of course, is a free-to-play game, multiplayer only, PC focused, but
Xbox, PlayStation as well now.
PC console. And when you say soft launch, I mean, soft launch is normally a mobile term. When you say soft launch, you just mean the effort to deploy it into players' hands and sort of manage it.
Yeah.
I mean, describe that.
Well, kind of internally, the way we looked at it was we wanted to take. I mean, we got started on this in January of 2017. So this is before Fortnite was out, before Warzone, Apex, right? I mean, there was still free to play was a thing, but not really. So our thought process internally, and just coming from my background being at Stanford and being surrounded by startups, our thought process was we're going to take a Silicon Valley tech startup approach to gaming. And, kind of what I touched on earlier is instead of doing this very hit-driven approach, we're going to just put our MVP out there. And so that was kind of our internal view of this was, we're launching our minimum viable product. We know it's not ready. We didn't even have a store on day one. We knew we had a lot to learn. I definitely will say we expected to do a lot better. Splitgate, when it first launched, it was still very fun, but it just didn't have all the other stuff. So I think the number one learning, without going into kind of key specific ways to improve, the number one overarching theme was, in order to have a successful game, you have to have it. There's a lot more to making a successful game than just making a fun game. Is kind of what our takeaway was.
Well, and always your expectations are never quite fully in alignment with the player base and how they're going to play, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a great. The more you can kind of validate with actual player input, is valuable. All right, so Sophia, I'm going to come back to you to talk a little bit about the sort of the traction at earlier stages versus Series A, right? You kind of said, hey, make it mainly a Series A. I'm sure there's a bunch of folks in the audience who don't understand what seed versus A versus like super quick, like tell us what that means, and then why is it as an investor you're at the A phase versus not a seed phase? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say it's a great question. Something that I would say a lot of founders pitching to us ask as well. I would say one of the main differentiators, at least in how I think about seed, is that oftentimes the seed checks that we're writing, they have the team, they have the thesis, and they don't have metrics yet to prove out that, you know, they're deserving of a huge check size to really like drill down and like fine tune their product. So for the seed bets, which I feel like we have done quite a few this year, it's much more about looking about the thesis and the team, right? Theses are ever evolving, reflecting changing tastes of players, you know, trends, as well as how the technology is changing. There's been a, you know, huge wave of pitches on Web3, you know, crypto, and the integration with gaming, which we don't need to get to today, but is definitely something we've all seen in our deal flow. And then as for the team, which I think is something that's kind of easier to talk about and understand, we want to make sure that the founding team has like an unfair advantage that they can use, right, in building a studio and building a game. But yeah, there are a lot of different aspects of the team we can talk more about. But I think, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this again, sort of the seed is, you know, before metrics that we've been talking about, the retention and daily all this kind of stuff. But you need other forms of evidence. Team with an unfair advantage, a thesis that makes sense relative to market trends. Give us a couple of hints at what team unfair advantages. Give us some examples.
Totally. So in terms of what I think would stand out for a team, I'm sure Ian can, you know, showcase many of these. We want someone with like a very sharp vision, but that also has like flexibility to adapt for success. There should be very deep passion about the problem they're trying to solve and how it's, you know, reflecting unmet needs in the market. And I think coupled with this is like an honest view of your own capabilities. I think, and we've seen this many times, humble leaders build better teams. They're better able to attract talent and partner with other folks, and I think take feedback well. So, you know, you could be someone who's really a technical savant. You could be someone who has had really great experience at a studio and have people who know they want to leave their current job to work for you. It doesn't need to just be technical. It can be, you know, something on the EQ side that really can have you stand out.
And to what extent, you know, does sort of pedigree or track record, right? I mean, because we often see like folks leaving Riot, and, you know, boom, they got 20 million. Like,
leaving Riot, leaving Blizzard, blah blah blah. I mean, there have been more people leaving Riot and Blizzard to start a studio, but I don't think that's definitely not the only path. I mean, like Ian started, you know, 1047 at Stanford. We also have founders who are like, they might not come from a, you know, game studio, but they're really passionate about gaming. They might come from a modding background or like just hacking away at a game themselves, and they can come up with very innovative ideas, you know, evolving existing genres.
Chris, I mean, do you see seed in the same way? Kind of, it's pre-metrics, it's team, thesis, unfair advantage. You're kind of making that bet.
I would generally agree. I think you know, sometimes you see some of these terms sort of blending together, right? So like what one person might consider a seed, another might consider a Series A or pre-seed, etc. I would say generally yes, though, right? Like you're definitely going to lean much more heavily on things like the team and the vision and market size and genre and those sorts of things early on. You know, sometimes we'll see cases where there's actually, you know, like a beta or some sort of very early release where there are some metrics to point to. But, you know, one, you have to take them somewhat with a grain of salt, right? Especially if you have things where it's like, you know, the golden cohort or whatever you want to call it, where the metrics might not reflect what they would at scale. But, you know, generally speaking, I think we look at it about the same.
Yeah. So Ian, you know, as the developer in the room here, I'm going to turn to you because I'm guessing the developers in the audience, they're sitting there saying, okay, I can go get some money from Sophia and Chris when I show up with all these amazing metrics and I've got my soft launch and players are in the game and matchmaking. How the hell do I get to that point? How do I build a team and build the prototype and run I need resources to even knock on their door. So give us some insight of like how that worked for you until you got to the point where the traction was there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like the best answer. I think to me, it's just like if you have a smart team, you're gonna figure it out eventually, and so you just have to find a way to stay alive. For us, like I said, we were fundraising for a very long time. We actually got very close to accepting an offer in early 2020 for our Series A, and then the pandemic hit, and so it was like, man, we're gonna run out of cash. So we had to lay off a lot of people. We actually had to ask. I mean, I asked the whole company, and my co-founder and I did this, and we asked the whole company, "Hey, is anybody willing to take part of their salary in equity, for the next foreseeable future, right?" And so some people did that, but I mean, for us, it was just like if we can stay alive, like we know we have something special, we know that people love this, there is a demand for it. We just have to stay alive long enough for either someone to give us money finally, or or I mean, kind of our backup plan was like, if we can't raise, we're just going to go back to our angels and ask for 500K, and like, which you don't always have the luxury of doing, but kind of the thinking was, worst case, we basically go beg, like, can you guys please give us 500K because we have to launch this thing eventually. And the funny thing was, we ended up we ended up calling it a seed round, and then we called the angel round a pre-seed round. But in May, we raised $6.5 million, and we didn't even use any of that for the launch. So like a big part of that was, okay, it'll give us some runway and we can spend some of that for marketing. And then we launched our beta, and it was like, oh my God, this is just doing this constantly. We didn't even need any of this money. We could have just done this all along. Like, so, but yeah, so I don't have a great answer. I mean, my answer is just kind of stay alive and keep at it. And, if you believe that you're onto something, maybe you are. Well, it just takes time.
So there's two things I want to dig into there. I mean, one is the sense that the metrics is kind of the priority, right? Like when you're in that mode, the momentum is not about production moment. Like it's not like, oh, let's write some more code and make our animations. Like it's about everything we have to do to get those numbers. I mean, I'm assuming that's the mindset you have.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be data driven in this day and age. Like you can't just go with your gut, because a lot of times your gut is wrong, or your intuition, or even if you just listen to your community, I think that's also super valuable. But if that's all you do, like, you will be led down the wrong path multiple times. And actually, like, it's funny because I've talked to Chris about this, but like the first thing we learned very quickly when we did our soft launch in May of 2019 was that our matchmaking was horrible. And we actually, this was an active decision that we thought was a selling point, was we brought back the Halo 2 1 to 50 ranking system. And, that was guided by community feedback and going to trade shows. And we would talk to people, and everybody has all this nostalgia for this system. But what we realized after looking at the data and experiencing, a pretty bad launch and a pretty horrible new user experience was like, wow, that system, there is a reason that Halo does not use that system and that no one uses that system. Anyway, so, I think it's a balance. You have to absolutely be data driven and look at the metrics. You can't only look at that, because you do have to value your community's feedback. Yeah. And I think a lot of times there's a happy medium where you can kind of take an approach that, is mindful of the data, but also mindful of what people want.
Sure. And then the other thing you kind of slipped in there was that you had angel investors.
Yeah.
Right. So before you can really go get call it real money from Sophia and Chris or similar funds of their scale, you had to get some cash.
Yeah.
And help us understand, the role that angels play, because I think generally the angels do take bigger risks. They do come earlier, and they're sort of backing your vision, and they're not asking for hard data the same way that
they're not asking for much in general, at least like in our case. So I guess, so when I got started, so I started this with a friend of mine from Stanford, and each of us, to get started, we each put in $7,500 of internship money. So I had interned at Apple and he had interned at Amazon. And so we each put that in. we hired a couple of part-time contractors, and then we just used a bunch of assets from the Unreal Engine marketplace. But even that was kind of enough for us to prove out, like, hey, this is really fun. It doesn't look that good. There's not a whole lot to it, but yeah, it's pretty cool and pretty impressive for a handful of people to build this. So with the angel funding, it's funny because we basically got put in touch with this angel investor who was a friend of like a classmate of my mom's or something like that. And
Always like that, yeah.
And so we're like, okay, you know, this random guy, you know, he's an angel investor. Like, you know, we go into this meeting thinking, there's no way he's going to give us money. Like, I don't even know why we're taking this meeting, right? Like, and we don't even need money, right? That was kind of our attitude. It was like, we're just going to do this thing and we'll launch it and it'll be great. And it was like 20 minutes in, he was like, well, I'd give you guys 500K right now. And we're just like, what?
Huge jump from the internship money pool.
Yeah.
14 or 15 grand to 500.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he's just like, yeah, we'll just put it in a safe. So like, you know, if people don't know what that is, it's simple agreement for future equity. It's kind of like a convertible note. But the idea is it's very basic. You put money in and you say, we'll figure out the terms later is kind of the gist of it is here's a bunch of money. And then whoever funds your next round, we get a discount on that is kind of the way that works. But yeah, I mean, Jim Morris was the angel investor. I mean, his attitude was just like, these guys are really smart. It's really impressive what they've built in a year. The fact that they each kind of put in their own money and, you know, didn't go work full time at Apple or Amazon. Like, I like these people. I'm going to bet on them.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any idea if the game is a good game or a good idea. It was, you know, I think with angel investors, that's normally what it is it's just like, we're going with our gut. Do we like this person? Do we think he's smart? Is this a winner?
Right. Cool. I mean, Sophia, I mean, why is it, let's say, that Makers doesn't behave like an angel, doesn't come in with those, like, I like Ian, here's the money. Like, help us understand a little bit the sort of VC math that sort of forces you to kind of go A rounds, bigger checks.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. It's always delightful when you have an angel who has that like willingness to make that leap of faith for you. But I think in terms of just where our expertise lies, it makes more sense for us if we're trying to look for something with a venture scale return. So that's like, you know, it's not like PE where you're like, oh, we can put in a later check, bigger size when there's more safety. We expect like a 3 to 4x return. We're looking for like more of like a 10x to 100x, right? So it's hard to make a ton of small bets that way. And I think also there's a factor of we are not a very huge VC, right? There's 10 people on our investment team, and we all want to like be quite hands-on with the portfolio companies we support. There's only so many checks you can make at a certain size with enough conviction and be able to support them to like help them grow over time. I think it's just very hard when you don't have that level of conviction at an early stage. Like, granted, I'll caveat again, there are very active angel investors who have confidence and are very good at, I would say when it's that early, it's very much a people bet, but I don't think that is our area of expertise. It's much more of like a mix of people, industry, understanding and connections, and then like metrics.
Yeah. I mean, again, Chris, I turn to you. I mean, we've known each other a little while. My sense is you would like to go earlier, but you're kind of constrained a little bit by just the nature of being a VC fund. I mean, is that kind of the case?
Sure. So I would say, you know, we do have a handful now of earlier stage bets. I think something like a third of our portfolio investments right now are at the sort of like seed or, you know, pre-seed, depending on what you want to call it, stage. I'd say, you know, tying back to the original question, right? One, you know, we have investors that we have to make a return for, right? So whereas an angel investor who's just investing their own money, you know, doesn't necessarily have to have the same sort of discipline that maybe an institutional investor might have to have. You know, that's one sort of challenge there. And the other, you know, big thing, and I think tying back into the venture math that you mentioned, right? while every investment that we make, of course, we hope it's going to be a big winner, right? The reality is that's probably not going to be the case, across institutional funds, right? And so if some percentage of your companies that you're investing in aren't going to be big successes, you need to position yourself to have these really, really large wins, to make up for, the companies that might drag on performance.
Yeah, I mean, someone had done the math. It was like for every $50 million invested, you need was it $1 billion of exit value? Something like this.
Yeah, I
Like,
think it varies. Yeah, there are a number of sort of factors that tie in there, right? One is like ownership, number of bets, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, that's directionally right? Like you need to be swinging for home runs such that you have these really, really massive returns that quote unquote can return the fund. Because some of the money unfortunately is just not going to be producing the same sort of returns.
Well, and to connect those dots, I mean, the whole point of traction, you're looking at the traction as evidence that this might be one of those home runs.
Exactly. And whereas I think previously, I think you see this less so, today, even amongst generalist funds, but I think generally, call it 5-10 years ago, people compared like gaming investing to like buying a lottery ticket, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen. It's very hit driven. The fact that the industry has sort of pivoted over time to more of these like quote unquote games as a service models, where you do have these retention metrics, and you can almost look at these companies as almost like a SaaS investment, right? So you have these retention metrics at scale, they're somewhat reliable, and then you can sort of just forecast things like LTV, which is lifetime value, the estimate of what a player is worth versus the cost of acquiring that player. And one, you have a more sort of repeatable, forecastable model, and two, some of these players are going to spend far more than they would have if it were just sort of a one-time, premium game purchase.
Yeah, much more scalable. Let's talk about benchmarks. I mean, Ian, before you made this motion with your hand, it's like, well, when this happened, like everything, all the doors open. But I mean, give us a sense of kind of those numbers. Like, what are the numbers that you hit that then all of a sudden everyone's throwing money at you? Like what did those benchmarks look like?
Yeah, I mean, so prior to the console launch, I mean, we would average like 300 concurrent users. So, it was not a lot. It was enough though that we could, make improvements and measure. But like I said earlier, it wasn't enough for the matchmaker to work reliably. And it doesn't matter. You could have the best game on the planet if people are waiting a long time to get a game and then they get destroyed, or if they're, playing on, maybe they're in Europe and they're playing on a US server, right? Like those are the sacrifices we made. And we could see in the data, like, okay, you're statistically more likely to quit permanently if you have 150 ping, or if you get blown out, or if you wait, 10 minutes to get a game. So we actually looked at all that data. I think, so the metrics, kind of the math we did in our head was like, we figured in order for us to do this, we have to get to 2,000 concurrent players, was kind of our rough estimate. And obviously more is better, but the thinking was at 2,000, if you think there's, how did we do this? I think we figured if you say 2,000, let's say that means there's 250 playing ranked at any given time. And if you take the top 10% and the bottom 10%, there's 25 people on both ends of the spectrum, which means on average you're waiting a max of 3 minutes. So we figured like, okay, that's acceptable. If you have to wait 3 minutes to get a good game, then everybody's getting a pretty good game. So we figured we got to get to 2,000 concurrent. So we figured, we'll do some PR, we'll launch our beta at the beginning of July, and then we'll make sure things are working, and then we'll start spending a ton of money to try to get to that 2,000 number by the end of July when we were planning on launching. We ended up hitting 4,000 concurrent on day one of the beta,
Oh, nice.
And so it was like instantly overnight, all of our metrics were drastically better, like we had sort of predicted. And at that point, it was just a virtuous cycle of like, oh, this game is good, it's fun, it's it's hot, and streamers want to play it, and so it just kept building on itself. And then we ended up delaying the launch, and then in early August, we started talking to VCs about this latest fundraise, and we were at the point at that time where we had, I think, 175,000 concurrent across all 3 platforms. I mean, yeah, I won't share too much more data, but we were making a lot of money every day.
Nice. Yeah, but it's interesting that for you, I mean, given the style of game that Splitgate is,
Yeah.
I mean, you were laser focused on the CCU, whereas I think, if you're doing
well, so the reason I mentioned that number specifically is during this time on day 2 of the beta, because we had so many users, our entire data pipeline went down.
Huh.
And so we were basically blind because, our data pipeline, we never had to optimize it because it was like, oh, there's not a whole lot of data coming in, so it just works. And then it was like, oh my God, we've already 10x'd. This whole thing just doesn't even work. Like, I can't see anything. And so the only thing we could really look at is like, okay, how many people are online right now? How much money are we making? And we couldn't even actually look at that because Sony is, I mean, I won't, whatever. They don't share you everything. So we were basically limited to like, okay, this is how many players we have. We're making this much on PC and this much on Xbox. And we figure like, we're probably making about the same on PlayStation, but we don't actually know that. So that was our traction. That was all we had.
Oh, well. Yeah, I mean, that's like, kind of such a great, like almost day and night. Sophia, earlier you mentioned, Sensor Tower, App Annie, some of the mobile, metric and data tools and stuff. I mean, what are some of the benchmarks that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think Chris and I mentioned this earlier, but I mean, there is, for all your user stuff, there's DAU, MAU, CCU, there's your retention, end day, or rolling, whatever makes more sense for your game. And then for some of the mobile games, there's your kind of like cost per impression, your payback period, which I think is very important for some genres where it's really just about buying ads and getting more users in. But I would say it really depends on the genre. And, there are some games where you don't expect to log in every day, or you might have a long session time, but you're only coming in once every other week, like something like Among Us, let's say, which, was huge during COVID. It's not the type of game you play every day, right? But it still performed extremely well at the time. But it's something like you might have a really bad D3 retention, but if you look at like your D30 or D60, it's very high.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, particularly, as you're suggesting, is the play patterns on different platforms and different genres, right? So I'm guessing the retention data and session data, for Splitgate is going to look very different than Among Us, which is also very different than something like Clash of Clans, or more
Everdale, whatever the latest Supercell game is.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not. I mean, certainly on the mobile side, there's sort of been this historical, like, was it like 40-20-10 or 40-20? Like day one, day.
Yes.
But that almost becomes irrelevant when you're talking about a PC console, shooter. So I don't know. Maybe just super quick back to you, Ian. I mean, what does your play patterns look like? I mean, relative to like a Clash of Clans where people are kind of coming in every day to collect their daily, treasure chests and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, our hardcore players are playing every day, and we do certain things to kind of try to incentivize that, right? We have like a daily check-in and a daily play streak. But I think, the casual fans, they're playing a few times a week. They're not necessarily playing every single day.
Or like weekend to weekend. Oh, we lost.
Yeah, they might play weekend to weekend. I mean, we definitely see a spike on the weekends relative to the weekdays, which makes sense. We also do, we have like a featured playlist. Oh.
So it's okay. Yeah, we'll keep. We lost Sophia, but we'll keep chatting and hopefully she'll reconnect. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I was just saying one of the other features we added was a featured playlist. So basically, every weekend we have some sort of variant of something where, maybe it's, I think the first weekend we did like a big head snipers playlist where it's like every single game mode within a playlist, everybody's got a massive head with a sniper rifle. We've done, I think we did a fight or flight game mode last weekend where it was like one team has low gravity with rocket launchers, the other team has snipers. So we'll do stuff like that where it's like it's not necessarily the game mode you want to play every single day, but it's like, hey, come back this weekend and we're gonna have something new and fun and unique to play.
Cool. Yeah, fun stuff. But again, thinking about those play patterns. Chris, any kind of comments on benchmarks that get you excited? I mean, some sort of really key ones, like don't even knock on my door if you don't have X and Y and Z.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's so binary, but I will say, retention is one that we put quite a bit of weight on, especially in the earlier days. I would say, honestly, probably even more so than things like, how much a player is spending. And, again, it ties into the comments earlier that the longer that you retain, in theory, the more money you're going to get from a player, right? And so, and also just like taking a step back and not making it so, sort of VC. If players are playing longer, the game is probably better, right? It's probably more fun.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of get lost in all these, metrics and numbers and stuff. But at the end of the day, a fun game naturally will, or a well-designed game will naturally kind of keep players more engaged. All right. Well, I mean, we're almost out of time. I mean, Ian, any recommendations or advice to other developers that maybe are kind of early in their journey and they think, they're hearing about all these funds and all this money sloshing around and oh, we're just going to like make a few VC calls and we'll have $5 million in the bank. I mean, give us some hard love.
I mean, I think my main piece of advice is what I said earlier, which is just find a way to stay alive. But I do think talk to everybody is the other thing I'd say. I mean, like your pitch is going to evolve over time. You're going to see what works and what doesn't and what resonates with people. So I would say, like, just be appreciative, form the relationships early, start talking to VCs, sooner rather than later, and just get to know them and build that relationship. I mean, we talk to everybody. I mean, really, like, and everybody said no to us, except for the ones who didn't. But I mean, we talked to a lot of people, and then months later we would go back to them and say, hey, we've made progress. Like, do you want to give us money now? Right? Like, so I would just say, talk to everybody and ask somebody who knows somebody, etc. And it's a numbers game. Most people are going to say no to you, but it only takes one person to say yes to you.
Cool. Chris, I mean, maybe specifically to key on one of the points that Ian made. If you're a developer and you want to start those relationships and you don't have metrics yet because you're still early, is it still worthwhile for them to have a chat with you? Just say, hey, this is what we're up to, get some feedback. Like it's not a pitch yet. It's more like a kind of just to meet you and get some input. And what are your thoughts on that?
I very strongly believe the answer is yes. We even will sometimes have conversations with folks that are very early and, we'll say initially like, hey, just to be upfront, you guys are earlier than what we typically look at, but we're happy to have a chat to start forming the relationship. Maybe we can, bounce some ideas off of each other, etc. And, Ian's exactly right. Like you want to look at this as, you want to look at these conversations as relationships, or beginnings of relationships, not just like, hey, what can this VC do for me? Exactly. Yeah. So I very strongly agree.
Cool.
And to add to that, I mean, do not burn a bridge if you get rejected. Like, you're going to get rejected most of the time, right? So develop the relationship, be humble, be appreciative, and then talk to them again in a few months. Like,
and it's a small industry, right? So, and and to Ian's point, like we've seen this, right? Like people will sometimes not, they get frustrated, maybe say something that they probably wish that they hadn't, and it's just not a good way to build a strong reputation.
Sure. Sophia, are you okay?
I thought I was talking, but it was only me able to hear myself, so I apologize for that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
Crazy.
well, I mean, you think we'd have all this tech figured out by now, but
It's definitely my fault. The MEGAMIGS team has been amazing. It's definitely my
Cool.
problem. So.
Cool. Well, I mean, we're almost out of time. I mean, since Sophia, you made the effort to come back and join us, any final words of wisdom for an early entrepreneur that's doesn't yet have the traction and they're trying to.
Yeah, I mean, I heard some of the tail end, I think, of what Chris and Ian were saying, but we have had many teams actually where we turn down not just once, twice, and we end up doing like their Series A or their Series B. And I would say just, don't get frustrated. I think you learn a lot of the things in this process. Like it might be the first time you're doing your fundraising. There are things you didn't realize you should be including, or like maybe you make critical hires to solidify your team. And I would say just, keep your head up, keep going at it. I think if you're really dedicated and passionate and you have something special, you shouldn't be giving up so early.
Right. Well, and importantly, that hockey stick motion that Ian kept doing, you can stay alive long enough to do this, then all those conversations kind of become easier and so on. Wonderful. All right, well, we're all out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us those insights. I especially like the dynamic that we had, developer and some investors on the panel together to talk through this topic. So thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, Ian. Hopefully next time we'll be on the ground in Montreal.
Totally.
That'd be great.
Have a great weekend, and thanks again.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you all.